as much as 6% of the World Trade Center dust consisted of tiny, previously molten iron spheres. What does this tell us about the temperatures generated in the tower's destruction?
When the USGS collected samples of the World Trade Center dust, they found the iron microspheres. Insofar, the USGS does not have a valid explanation for the presence of these iron microspheres.
So what do the microspheres contain? Iron is the main element, and then it has smaller portions of aluminum, sulfur, a trace of manganese. Most of them are less than about 1/10 of an inch in diameter, and they're spherical. And they're found in all of the dust blown out of the buildings during collapse, no matter where in Manhattan that dust is picked up.
You must have had a much hotter heat source for you to get 2,700 degrees Fahrenheit in order to melt the iron to get these molten spheres. Your heat source must be something like a chemical reaction, an exothermic chemical reaction that reacts, in the case of thermite, reacts at 4,500 degrees Fahrenheit.
My contention, based on finding thermite residue in the dust, is that it happened before. It didn't happen after in the fires that ensued in the rubble pile afterwards. It's all the characteristics of the microspheres, along with what I see in the attack of the beams that were actually found, tell me that thermite was involved in melting those steel beams.
Out of the ashes of the World Trade Center devastation rises the Freedom Tower, whose foundation, however, is shrouded in question. For example, in the World Trade Center dust, an international team of scientists find an advanced form of highly energetic nanothermite composites. What is it, and where does it come from?
In the dust, we found what we characterize as unreacted thermitic material in the shape of some very tiny red-gray chips. And in the reaction they produce molten iron, which is the prime indication of a thermitic reaction. And such a reaction can be used to destroy steel structures. What we have found is a modern version of thermite, which we call nanothermite, which is produced in a different way. It is not just two powders being mixed. The material is actually built from the atom scale up. We call it the bottom-up procedure, which is what you do in nanotechnology. The ingredients are much smaller, which means they're reacting faster and they are more easily ignited.
The primary elements in the red material are aluminum, iron oxide, as well as silicon and carbon. The iron oxide appears in faceted grains, approximately 100 nanometers across. The aluminum appears in thin platelets, about 40 nanometers thick. This is discussed in our paper in the Open Chemical Physics Journal, published in April of 2009. But so far, none of these papers have been refuted in the literature, the scientific literature. So that means they are unchallenged in the scientific sense. They stand as an indictment, really, of the official story of 9/11.
We also took paint that came off of the WTC steel and looked at that in the SEM and did a compositional analysis of that and found that it was not similar to the red-gray chip or the red layer of the red-gray chips.
This cannot be paint. Paint does not have these exotic properties. It's impossible.
This is material that is of military use that really shouldn't be there.
You don't need to be an engineer or an architect to see what happened to those buildings.
honest investigator would be looking at this and looking for explosives and so forth. The NIST investigation didn't go there. They just would not look for explosives. This has been the work of independent researchers, not NIST.
So the preconceived notion of NIST is that there's no evidence for explosives, and so there's no point in looking. That is the most unscientific thing that you can possibly think of, not to look because you don't expect to find evidence, and in fact the evidence is overwhelming that these red-grade crystals are very high-temperature incendiaries. They state these conclusions for which there's virtually no evidence, and then they ignore conclusions that can be drawn from the evidence.
The only way that a building can accelerate as it collapses is by having pre-engineered, precisely timed, and precisely placed explosives. In other words, controlled demolition.
We have a professional responsibility, and I urge every engineer and architect and demolitions expert and anybody that has any knowledge in this field to examine the evidence and stand up and be counted, because the rest of the world is depending upon us.
We know we've been lied to about 9/11. We don't know for sure who did it. We don't know exactly how they did everything. And that's why we need a new investigation to find out. We do know that there was a massive cover-up, that there was evidence hidden and destroyed. The American people absolutely need the truth of 9/11.
Some kind of consciousness raising on my part before I was willing to look at the possibilities. And really, you need to go where the evidence leads.
Let's look at it objectively. Let's look at the evidence, not these fabricated computer models and hearsay and all these predetermined conclusions. Let's really open it up again and investigate this thing properly, and then come to conclusions.
I strongly support an independent investigation that would be independent of the government, independent of all of the influences that obviously were in effect during the NIST investigation.
What happened on 9/11 is not something that is just going to go away. This is very pertinent to us today. I wish to further the investigation, and I want to make a difference because I want this to be a safe and better place for my children.
Signed the petition on the Architect and Engineers 9/11 Truth website, mainly because I wanted to stand behind the families that lost people on 9/11. The 9/11 Truth movement was started by the families that lost loved ones on that day, and they were all out there alone screaming for help, and our own country was ignoring them and ignoring their needs and not taking care of them the way we should have after that happened.